Thank you so much for coming tonight to this Vivid Ideas event hosted by Sydney Ideas. It's great to be here and it's a beautiful night to be here too. Has anyone seen the quad yet? I actually haven't been over there, but you might know it's lit up for Vivid Ideas and also for Reconciliation Week. So do try and see it if you can after tonight's event. My name's Jackie Randalls and I manage a national program called Inspiring Australia. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose lands we meet tonight, and also mention again that it's Reconciliation Week and there's lots happening on campus, so check out the program. The program I manage, Inspiring Australia, seeks to create links between science and everyday people. Creativity is very much part of this process. For example, this slide is a neuron, and these are knitted neurons. And on the table there you'll see some more, and here are some more. And this project, Neural Networks, invites people to craft their own brain health by creating textile neurons towards a travelling art exhibition. And we're making a big woolly brain installation that's going to travel around the country, and it kicks off during National Science Week at the Hazelhurst Regional Gallery and Arts Centre. So we'd love you to get involved. It's called Neural Networks, and you can find out all about it on the National Science Week website. I'm giving it a shameless plug here tonight because I know you're all really creative. But the whole point is to raise awareness of brain and mind health. And we're working with serious scientists and neuroscientists and Alzheimer researchers to try and find a way to engage everyone with the science of brain health. Neural Networks is one of hundreds of community initiatives that are being developed right across the country to try and engage researchers with the general public. Most of these initiatives are fun and welcoming, and we're trying to engage non-scientists, but they're all underpinned by serious science and they involve input from experts to ensure accuracy and relevance. So while my job at Inspiring Australia is very much about community, I'm interested in making connections between institutions and the wider community. And so for me, in the context of tonight's discussion, I'd personally like to know how to make academia more relevant to other people, to the rest of the world, and whether creativity might help bridge this gap. Tonight, we've got 4 very clever, distinguished Sydney University academics from diverse disciplines, and they'll consider how academia inspires and creates, or blocks creativity. And in so doing, how it reinforces the value and importance of education. Tonight's format will be a short presentation from each of them, followed by open discussion, which I hope you'll join us in. I'll introduce each of the speakers now and then return to start the questions off in about 45 minutes. Just so we know who's here tonight, can you raise your hand if you're a student? Are there any students in the audience? Yeah, a few. What about an academic? Yep, good show of academics. Is anyone a designer? Lots of designers. What about teachers? Any teachers? Yep, we've got some teachers here. How many people would describe themselves as creative? Would anyone describe themselves as not creative? Not that I don't think that's possible. Okay, so there's a few really boring, uncreative people here. But on that note, we're going to start off by really looking at the notion of creativity and what it's all about. And it's fitting to start with Ruth Barkin. Dr. Ruth Barkin is a senior lecturer in the Department of Gender and Cultural Studies, who's recently been awarded the Vice-Chancellor's Award for Outstanding Teaching. Ruth's research explores the body in contemporary culture with particular interests in nudity, nudism, and complementary and alternative medicine. She'd never describe herself nor her work as creative, so you're in good company. But tonight she'll interrogate what we mean by creativity, and then she'll shed some light on the discipline of cultural studies, where you get to think outside the box about anything and everything. Fantastic path. After Ruth, we'll hear from Dr. Lee Stevenson, sitting beside Ruth. A physicist by training, Lee is a researcher at the Australian Centre for Microscopy and Microanalysis, a cross-disciplinary research centre. Lee produces gorgeous microscopic images not only to inform the public and research, but also to inform research directions relating to medical and materials engineering, to nanoscience and biology. With a varied career that includes working on a range of scientific fields, including science communication, today Lee juggles huge data sets from a machine called the Atom Probe, and hopefully he'll tell us all about it. And at home, he likes to make elaborate science exhibits. Next up after Lee, we'll hear from Dr. Leanne Loke, a senior lecturer in the Design Lab at the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Planning. Leanne also directs the Masters of Interaction Design and Electronic Arts program. Her work explores human-centred design approaches to interactive technologies and spaces. It incorporates dance performance to show us new ways of using our bodies as we interact with gadgets and machines in our day-to-day lives. And I just love the idea of doing dance and salutes to the sun as I get through my work and, you know, interact with my car and so on. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Leanne. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Michael Anderson, an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Education and Social Work. Michael's passion is to inspire creativity in arts education, and in fact in all fields. He thinks everything can be creative, no matter how boring the task might seem. At the same time, he wants to promote rigour in the process. Creativity really does require discipline and rigour. He'll discuss how he seeks to light fires, as he says, in the imagination and promote creativity across all areas, from admin to accounting to art practice. So get ready to be amazed. First up, let's hear from Dr. Ruth Barkin.
A few years ago, I was walking down King Street, Newtown, when a smart young man in a snappy suit and a power-dressed young woman walked by. "They just don't realise. They have to think outside the square," said the smart young man earnestly. I remember thinking how funny it was that anyone should champion creative thinking by using a cliché. Not that I'm one to talk. When I was asked to participate in this forum, my first thought was that somebody had got it wrong. Creative? Not me. Hard-working? Yes. Fortunate? You bet. But creative? No, I was the girl who'd done well at school, gone straight to university, done well at university, gone into school teaching, gone back to university, and from there straight into an academic job. I'd done plenty of interesting things along the way, but creative doesn't sound like the right kind of word to describe that trajectory. Linear might be something more like it. Or, given that I'm a teacher from a family of teachers, a girl who decided on day one of kindergarten that she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up and then grew up to become, well, a teacher, then other words spring to mind. If I'm feeling kind to myself, then dogged or consistent might do the job. On a bad day, unimaginative might seem to capture it better. But I work in gender and cultural studies, and I'm trained never to simply accept the terms in which a question is posed. So before I answered the invitation, I found myself asking, well, what is creativity anyway? And might there be some understanding of it that encompasses what I and my colleagues in gender and cultural studies do? Because the point is not really whether I am or am not creative, but rather how we as a society understand creativity, and whether there are some clichés we could do well to avoid. I found myself resisting the tacit assumption that creativity is a privileged mode of thinking or being. I wanted to insist that it's okay not to be creative. We need all kinds of thinkers, not only those who look outwards or upwards or beyond, but also those who narrow their focus, who look inwards or downwards, and are dogged and diligent rather than expansive and imaginative. The scientist who tenaciously pursues a topic for her whole career, or the historian patiently combing through the archive. Complex real-world problems need a whole ecology of thought, and we mustn't fetishise creativity as a superior mode of being. To do that is to buy into the romantic narrative of tortured geniuses leading the revolution, or to tacitly reinstate class hierarchies by which the inner-city art lover is a worthier being than the commuter who survives the 609 from Strathfield every day. If we fetishise creativity, we run the risk of repeating a host of cultural clichés and social status quos, and that would be deeply uncreative. Still, at that point in my thinking, I'd successfully avoided the question of what creativity might actually be, and I kept coming back to that square that the earnest young man wanted someone to think outside of. As it happens, in one of those moments of serendipity, I came across an 18th century French novella called A Journey Round My Room, in which the author, Xavier de Maistre, goes armchair travelling, literally. Confined to his room for 42 days after a duel, he realises that he can make grand metaphysical discoveries about love, friendship, and the relationship between mind and body by observing the ornaments, books and paintings around him. He finds that one can stay inside the box, literally the box of his small room, and discover a whole world of ideas. This story reminded me that boxes, parameters, limits, structures, deadlines, do not simply constrain creativity, they can also enable and generate it. The sonnet form, for example, enabled Shakespeare to express sentiments that have lasted 400 years within lines whose number, length and metre was set down by tradition, and using rhetorical forms derived from the ancient Greeks and Romans and learnt by rote in class with the other Elizabethan schoolboys. But rules, restraints and conventions don't tell us everything there is to be known about creativity. And the more I thought about it, the more I realised that perhaps, to some, my research might look like it's creative, even if that's not the term that I use for it myself. To illustrate this, here are a couple of photos of me on research. None of those are me. One of those is me. These pictures come from a 7-year research project I conducted on the cultural meanings and embodied experiences of nudity. That project took me to nude night surfing, to puppetry of the penis, the bum puppets and the manpower male strippers. I joined in a Guinness Book of Records nude line dancing event. I worked naked in a nudist research library in Florida. I donned white archivist's gloves in the State Library to look at Larry Pickering's calendars of naked politicians. I spoke to people who cut up dead bodies for anatomy labs, to masseurs, artists and nudists, and to beauticians performing Brazilian waxes. I studied the history of pubic hair fashions. I didn't always feel like a proper researcher. Subsequent research projects have taken me into equally unlikely territory. For a project on the sensory dimensions of alternative medicine, I visited spiritual healers working in hospitals, interviewed clairvoyants, lay on the floor in a group yelling, "Bah, bah, bah, ka, ka, ka," and had my digestive habits analysed by someone inspecting my irises through a slit lamp. What, if anything, could we call creative about this type of research activity? Well, firstly, there's the occasional lucky strike, having a good idea in the first place. In the case of the nudity book, there was a precise moment of inspiration. I was visiting an acupuncturist I'd never seen before, and he put a needle in a spot on my ear called the winds of inspiration. He also asked me to strip off and covered me with the teeniest, weeniest towel. As I lay there, passive but fuming, I found myself thinking, I'd rather be naked than so barely covered. Oh, that's interesting, I thought. I'll write a book about that. And I never went back to that acupuncturist, but I left with my big idea tucked away. But not all creativity starts with an illuminating idea. Sometimes all the work comes first, and the idea is the last thing to emerge. A second feature of the gender and cultural studies research approach is the central role it accords to curiosity. I go to the nudist beach, the New Age seminar, or the research interview with my eyes and ears wide open, ready to absorb. Openness is essential, but so too is critique, and I also go with my brain switched on and a couple of decades' worth of reading in social and critical theory under my belt. Third, my particular research work requires a preparedness to trust instincts and hunches, to follow a path before you know where it will lead. This, of course, presupposes a whole ideological and economic climate in itself, a society willing to allow and indirectly fund this type of contingent endeavour, whose outcomes can't be known in advance. There's also, I guess, a certain personal courage required to go to unforeseen places, both in the literal sense, like visiting a swimming pool in an outer Sydney suburb on a wintry Saturday evening wearing only an awkward smile, as well as in the metaphorical sense of unexpected intellectual journeys to unknown destinations of thought. This then might be a further dimension of creativity, the willingness to ask new questions, like, do clairvoyants see in colour? Or forge new connections, say, between nudity and foundational ideas of humanness, or to apply big theories and concepts to unexpected objects. In my case, creativity definitely consists in a certain playfulness, being prepared to ask questions that make me smile and take on topics that might seem light-hearted, but that have much to teach us about what we value, what we fear, how we know things, what we ignore, and which social games favour which kinds of people. This type of work involves taking risks, and the interdisciplinary work that characterises gender and cultural studies is like that. It takes new, mundane, hidden or shameful objects as its topics. It asks counterintuitive questions. It brings unlikely combinations of theories, methods and objects into collision, risking offence, derision or incomprehension from more traditional disciplines and from the general public alike. Interdisciplinary work doesn't stay inside the box. It doesn't behave itself. But what is the point and the value of all this unruly intellectual activity? One wouldn't be an ethical scholar if one didn't ask that question frequently and carefully, especially in an era in which taxpayers' contributions to universities are, quite rightly, but often unsubtly, called into question. At moments when I wonder about or even doubt the purpose of this open-ended, curious inquiry, I always turn back to the classroom, the place where I find most purpose and which produces exhilaration and self-questioning in almost equal measure. In the classroom, I'm reminded of the point and the impact of what we in gender and cultural studies do. We teach students to follow their instincts, to open their eyes, ears, and indeed their hearts, to ask new questions, to value the counterintuitive, the critical, and the challenging. We invite them to look inside the square of their own lives and to connect what they see to a bigger social and intellectual picture. They see their world anew by writing essays about their grooming habits or eating practices, reality TV, going to the gym, cosmetic surgery, knitting, composting. In gender and cultural studies, we know we've done good work in the classroom when our students tell us that we've opened their minds. And they do. In emails and evaluations, they say things like, "I remember fondly your classes and draw on what I've learned every day," or "This subject opened a whole new world." They tell us passionately that something has changed. One student said, "I've no clue where my study will take me, hopefully into an area where I can contribute something valuable. All I know is that I've learned so much already and it's changed my life." So I may not be creative, but I'm allowed to ask any question I want of the world, and I'm teaching my students to do the same. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Lee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. I feel like... Oh, get over here. I feel like a little bit of a sinner speaking after Ruth, not only because I don't have my crib sheet in front of me, and so I did not prepare as I suppose I could have, but also that I'm not so eloquent. I use my slides that I prepare before every talk I have, and I haven't given a talk in a while, so I'm feeling the heart race a little. I use my slides as a bit of a crutch, but I must confess to you that the crutches that I start off with turn into stilts, and soon enough I'll dance around the stage, so I'll try and control myself tonight. I'm a microscopist at Sydney University. If you're familiar with this campus, there's a lovely old sandstone building called the Madsen Building that's over there somewhere. And in the basement there are all these multi-million-dollar instruments, the like of which many of you would be unaware of, not insulting you, but I mean, I've walked by that building many times, and before actually working there, I had no idea that there were these instruments there, no idea at all. But I won't bore you too much with talking about those instruments and how they work and blah, 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 because tonight is not a science lecture, nor is it my traditional type of talk. A picture of me here was taken by my friend as I was admiring the light through a cup of tea in Sumatra on the slopes of a mountain called Kerinci. And I guess anything that really, I guess it was singing to me. You know, I saw this tea in the sun, it was morning, I was a little bit crazy because I hadn't got much sleep, high altitude and all. And it was just the perfect picture. So I posted on Facebook as the kids do these days. And 5 minutes later, so it seemed, one of my friends in Bali had posted another picture that they had somehow within that time found upon Google Images. And it was a painting of a medieval alchemist holding up a suspiciously similar potion as to what I was admiring. If I had my way, now seeing that painting, I would always drink my tea out of such a potion bottle as what he's got. But anyway, I digress. I'm a microscopist, and microscopy is all to do with light, or things that we can treat as light. And so it's pretty much the scientific photography. If you've ever met a person that says, I'm a photographer, as I have sometimes said, then the science of microscopy is like that. It's like, I'm a microscopist. But I have to explain, because a lot of people have quizzed me as to what microscopy is. And that kind of frustrates me. I say, we work with microscopes. And they go, what's a microscope? So it's like, best to show you the images. So these aren't my images. I do acquire microscopy images, but I can't actually say that they are as gorgeous as what, thank you, Jackie, said. Now these are all images to do with that feature in the Incredible Inner Space exhibition that is currently at the University of Wollongong. So if you have the opportunity to go there, I would endeavour to take a drive down to the Gong and see for yourself. Up here, we have all these different types of microscopy. The one on the far left, up top, is confocal microscopy fluorescence microscopy of breast cancer cells. The one in the middle up the top is a moth proboscis. Going across again is wattle pollen, that intensely annoying invisible powder that makes most of us sneeze come spring. Below this, the bottom left, we have an X-ray tomogram. If you've heard of CT scanning, this is the microscopy version of it. And this is of the internal workings of a chiton, a little shellfish that we find on the coast of Australia. In the middle, we have the grey and white image there. That's a transmission electron microscope where we use electrons instead of light passing through the sample. And these are little baubles, silicon nanoparticles that contain modern-day medicine. It's a delivery mechanism that people are working on in Australia. And then in the bottom right, we have, which is somewhat of my field, we have a steel that has been visualized in a scanning electron microscope. Scanning meaning that we're taking a beam of electrons and we're going back and forth, and measuring the signal coming off of it. And that's to show us the structure of the steel. Now, you'll notice that all of these images use color. And some of them, you know, when you initially get them, are just black and white. They're gray. We use color because we want to be able to communicate effectively what they are. And so there's that element of creativity that microscopists like myself use. Now, sometimes I'm lazy, and these are a couple of images that I've made. Now, in the bottom left hand, there is a transmission electron microscope of an aluminium copper silver alloy that I worked on a few years ago. And those plates that you see, they are aluminium silver plates that form when you heat this metal up. And these plates, they stop you from bending the material. They stop if you hit the material. They stop it from scratching. And you'll find these plates in every metal. Okay, you might not know the steel that you use, the aluminium of your awning. They all have some kind of microstructure like this that prevents the material from being damaged, that gives it its strength. This one was really brittle. It was really hard. It was wonderful, but it was really brittle. And you can see that not only have I done this black and white image on the left here, but we wanted to have a 3D representation, so we used an instrument called the atom probe. And I'm not sure if you can see on the screen there that you can see in the middle there's a Z forming, and that is 3 plates that are intersecting. And it was amazing when I was rotating this data set for the first time, and I just saw that and went, wow, look at that structure, that's amazing. But every little red dot on that image is an atom. So that's hard to communicate, really. It's hard to communicate what is real when we've all got macroscopic senses. Now, to go on, I want to talk a bit about the creativity that is sometimes in science. And you may be somewhat aware of the scientific process, the hypothesizing, the experimenting, the mathsy conceptualizing that a lot of scientists use. And they use this to not only communicate to their fellow scientists, but as tools, as props, to understand the science that they've done. For example, take quantum physics. It was developed around the turn of last century, going into the 1910s and 1920s. And then even the smartest people, Schrödinger and Einstein, disagreed on elements of quantum physics because it was a new concept. They didn't fully understand what they had wrought. And even today, it's a hard subject to, wrap your mind around. You need visualizations. You need different ways of understanding, how the natural world works. And not any one person can really understand how the world works. One of my favorite stories of science is back in the late 19th century, a chemist called Auguste Kekele, I think I got his, yeah, Auguste Kekele. He had a dream. He was working on aromatic chemicals, and he was going, I don't understand. So he was just having a dream one day, looking out his window, daydreaming. And I'm not sure where this image came from, whether he was like thinking of art or some story he read, but he thought of the Ouroboros worm biting its own tail. And he thought, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's benzene. And you see, it was that little key, which doesn't actually fit into the scientific process, but nonetheless ran like a thread through the scientific process to come up with not only a descriptor of that molecule, but the descriptor of all other molecules. Anyway, I've got to rush on now. So I just want to tell you that I started with, as an emblem for this event, I started with the left-hand grey image down the bottom, and I went, nah, that's boring. Traditionally, because we worked with phosphor screens in field ion microscopy, and I should say that every one of those dots in the bottom images there, every one is an individual atom. I'm not going to tell you how this microscope works now. You can ask me later if you're interested, or consult Wikipedia. But when I went to the green, I went, oh, that's cool, but I can do better. So I went to Photoshop and I fiddled around with it. Ooh, land scale. Let's see what that does. Geoscience colors. Oh, that's really nice, but it's calming. It's not groovy enough. I need something groovy and psychedelic. That's what I want. Okay, now to wrap up, I wanted to exercise my creativity as a scientist to talk about science. I wanted it to be an experiment for myself. So what I did is I went, all right, I will try and make one of these science exhibits that I haven't had in my mind since working in Indonesia. I will make a model of the galaxy using a Dreamweaver, yes, with beads. Yes, I am ready. And it took me ages. And this is what I've made, and it's not finished yet. I was awake all last night. I've got a tray of beads at home in my bedroom. My bedroom is a complete disgrace right now. But yeah, you can really, if later you would like to lie underneath it to see the spiral structure, you can. But this was my obsession. And from my obsession, and it's not the first time I've been obsessed, I've spent 70, 80 hours per week in front of a microscope in a dark room all by myself. And this is just my latest and greatest. So, well, I think I'm right. Yes. Sorry, microphones. I'm here. 1 minute. I've got to rush on. So this is our Milky Way galaxy. I came up with a few ideas about creativity within science, right? Because of this. You might go, what are the beads? The beads aren't stars. The beads are representations of where stars might be. A whole group of stars, a whole cluster of stars. you ask that question and I answer it, and it brings both of us to a realization, well, if this was to scale, how large would the galaxy be? If the sun was the size of the smallest speed that I have here, where would the nearest star be? I tell you, it'll be 50 kilometers out to sea. It'll be, and it's the same size as ours, it'll be at the foot of the Blue Mountains, up near the Hawkesbury River. Space is that big, but stars are so bright that every night we go outside and we can see something, say at the distance of the Hawkesbury River away, a tiny little bead like this, glowing, and we can see that star. Now, that might not take you to much realization as it has me, but I've never thought about space like that before. And it's that metaphor that I've made through diagrams, that's brought me to that realization. So I would say that, and I've got a lot more to say, but I can't finish. I'd say that for me, creativity in science is about metaphors. It's about, you know, that weave, that silver thread that runs through science that we often don't acknowledge. And everyone is creative in some way. There is no unique snowflake that is the artist, no unique snowflake that is the brooding, uncreative science. We all have elements of creativity in each other. And, well, thank you very much. That's as much as I really can say right now without going crazy. Next up is Liam. Next.
Good evening. When I was invited to be on this panel, I was initially a little bit affronted by the title of the talk. It was, you know, I'm not creative, but, and my initial response was like, but I am creative. You know, that's what I've been saying. It's my little sort of song that's been going on through my head for the last sort of 25 years. Because when I'm going to wind back, when I went to uni, I actually did a degree in electrical engineering, computer science. I spent 5 years in studying heavily technical stuff, doing loads of maths, working through textbooks about this long, electronics, all kinds of things. And it was a sort of an education where I didn't really think I was taught about how to be creative. There was no really creative thinking in it that I could sense. I hope it's changed. And so there was always this undercurrent, though, for me of a creative life that was going on outside of the one that I was studying in, the one that I was spending my working life in. Because when I finished my degree, I went and worked on the Collins-class submarine, and that's what you're seeing there, and spent a few years as working as a systems engineer. But I actually wanted to be a fashion designer. So I was actually in love with the theatre of fashion. And that's what really sort of fueled me, my imagination. What I spent a lot of my time doing in my spare time was, you know, making clothes and costumes and dressing up and all that sort of stuff, which may seem kind of frivolous, but for me it really fed something really essential to how I kind of connected with the world. And so it took me a long time to kind of steer myself, you know, out of this very nice job, well paid and all that kind of stuff, into a spot where I could be, explore my creativity and try and get it sort of center stage of what I was doing. That took a long time, though, but I also, while I was doing that, started to discover dance, and the dance and fashion sort of came together in a way that I thought, well, you know, it's all very well making clothes, beautiful clothes, and you can strut them on the catwalk, but what if you could actually dance those clothes, and what if you could explore that relationship between how the material meets the body and what happens in that space and the expression and all kinds of things that go on there. You'll see in a moment why this is so important, the dancing and how I work with that in different ways. But unfortunately, I ended up having a long exile in the world of code and spent a decade teaching software development and programming, which has actually put me in great stead for where I am now, because ever since I joined the design lab at Sydney University 2 or 3 years ago, I've suddenly been able to use those skills in a much more creative way. So in the design lab, we have an undergrad program and the Masters of Interaction Design, and it's really putting a creative frame around those kind of technical skills that you might learn in an IT or engineering program, and finding much more expressive ways to actually work with those technologies and those materials. So I suddenly found myself in an environment where I felt really comfortable and felt like I could actually bring my passion into what I was doing. And I think that's one of the most important things. It doesn't matter what kind of creativity you're born with, that you find the environment that actually does feed that creativity. So it could be creative in science, could be creative in maths, or it could just be the old-fashioned traditional creative arts where I tend to feel more at home. So then once I joined the design lab, I was able to then bring together into my research as well as my teaching my love of dance and the body and those more expressive elements. But a lot of what I do in my work is not necessarily making dance or art, it's actually looking at how to translate some of those sensibilities into how you design interactive technologies, which may seem a bit odd, but that's sort of what I get really interested in, making those translations across different disciplines. I'm going to show you some examples of the sort of things I do. But when I was doing my, my PhD research, I was really looking at how this idea of the habit body. It's come from Merleau-Ponty. He's a phenomenologist that talks about habit. So habit is a good thing because it actually means we can become skillful and we can operate on autopilot. We don't have to think about what we're doing. But also the habit body means we can get, we just get into a habitual mode of things, we become dull. We have a lack of vitality, we have a lack of creativity. And so what I'm interested in is how we can design spaces and technologies can actually help us disrupt the habit body. How can we get through into like a really fresh way of looking at how we move or how we act or how we interact with other people or with the things that are around us. So this is one example from a research project I'm running with a colleague of mine, Dagmar Reinhardt, who's an architect. She does the fabulous stuff where she uses digital models and fabrication and makes these wonderful installations. But my role is then to think about how you actually choreograph the interaction and the materiality. So I'm using my dance knowledge in a way that actually thinks about how we can create interactive experiences or trajectories that move through these environments that actually have sensors in them, so we use motion sensors and things like that. And we're also interested in the kind of kinetic materiality, so we're looking at ways to make material move, as well as using sound and things to create these sort of new experiences that hopefully can make you a little bit more curious about your relationships with your environment as well. So these kinds of installations became, in our everyday environments, what would it be like to live with something that maybe encourages to move in a different way or, reflects back a certain kind of expressive mode of being. Another project that I'm doing, another strand, so that one was about sort of distributed choreographies. Another one is looking, again, back to the habit body, but looking at more like everyday acts of things like walking and how we can actually be more creative with that act. And so I've got a couple of things going there, but one of them I'm working with Frank Feltham down in RMIT in Melbourne. He's doing a PhD with me, and we've got this slow floor, that's what you can see up there. So it's a very simple system. It has pressure sensors in it that register where you are on the floor. But the cool thing is that it has a sound response. It's very textural, and it actually I think it evokes a slightly more imaginative way of thinking about how you move in that environment. So we're very interested in how this kind of system could be installed in different kinds of places, in hallways, or maybe even in staircases and things like that. So at the moment the university has this big health drive on to get people to move more and sit less and sex up things like staircases. So instead of just having a set of stairs, you think, oh God, what a drag it is to walk up these stairs, can we actually make it an interesting and playful place to be in? So we're looking at using sound and things like that to actually prompt those kinds of experiences. So watch out for those musical staircases coming soon. Okay. I've got a couple of minutes left, have I? So what I also wanted to talk about a little bit was, again, I guess with this translation thing I'm doing between things like dance and somatics. So somatics are those kinds of practices like Ruth mentioned with yoga, or it could be Tai Chi or something like Feldenkrais, where you actually look at the quality of your attention and also your intention to do something. And so it could be a very simple movement. It could be something like just standing or taking a step or sitting. And by the way you use your intent or look at your awareness around that, you can actually change your feeling state. So you can play with your psychosomatic state by using your imagination and by directing your attention in different ways. So I'm very interested in how we could then translate that into different kinds of technologies and things like wearable technologies as well. But I thought we'll actually have a go at just exploring that. So I'm just going to ask you to move along with me. So if you can first of all just raise your arms up above your head. Okay, and just note how that was for you. And you can lower them. And now we're just going to breathe. So with your breath, we're breathing in. Allow your breath to move your arms up above your head. And then breathing out. So that probably felt a little bit different, yeah? Now the third one is using an image. So some of the dance practice I do at the moment is body weather, and it's an image-based dance practice. And we use the imagination to act on the body as a material. So this one, you have to use your imagination. So it's about imagining, just put your arms up, and imagine that hundreds of butterflies, delicate butterflies, are just alighting on your arms. And the butterflies, the movement of the butterflies is actually moving you. So as those little wings are all sort of burring and quivering, and maybe there's a gentle breeze, that actually makes your arm move. So just those changes in your intent actually can really radically make a very different experiential state in the body. So, but how do we translate into technologies? And that's the big question, the big challenge, the sort of stuff I'm doing at the moment. But what's interesting with that, with the body weather Buto stuff, is that you use the image as a framework. So it's not about just repeating something or repeating a pattern, but actually trying to improvise within those rules. So as like Ruth mentioned, with constraints and rules can actually be very generative and very creative. That's how we work in body weather. And it's about trying to generate surprise for yourself within a framework. So how can we actually welcome the unexpected into what we're doing? And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you. Okay. Over to Michael.
This is Ryan. I met Ryan 20 years ago at Gosford High School, in fact. And Gosford High School and Gosford itself was the moment that I realised that we all have creativity within us. It's probably unlikely that Gosford and creativity have been used in the same sentence in the past, but I'm willing to kind of forge some new territory this evening. Ryan was a footballer, probably still is a footballer. I imagine he's a bouncer probably at Gosford Leagues Club these days. In fact, I know he's a bouncer at Gosford Leagues Club these days. But I found myself and Ryan in the same class. I was the teacher. I was his drama teacher for Year 12 drama. And as part of Year 12 drama, what happens is that all students are asked to perform. They're asked to perform for a group of examiners that tour from place to place. They're asked to be creative in that performance. And of course, Ryan wasn't a particularly applied student, I think we could say. Ryan mucked about. Ryan kind of teased the girls. Ryan wasn't the guy I was expecting to really perform for me on the day, or perform for himself, or to be creative at all. So the day came, as it always does, and we were sitting down and the examiners came in with their suits, sat down with their pens, clicked their pens. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, Ryan's going to come out here and he's going to stand there and that'll be it. There won't be anything creative except for what the examiners say about his performance. It'll be horrendous. It will be terrible. All this work that I've done, trying to instill creativity into these students, fill these empty vessels, and yet there will be nothing for Ryan. Ryan will remain empty as he always has been. The arrogance of youth, or at least my youth. Anyway, Ryan came in, the lights buzzed up, I put my face in my hands. And then something amazing happened. Ryan, who I never recall actually rehearsing or doing his lines or anything, came out with this extraordinary piece of theatre, this creative, this wonderful piece of theatre that told the story of a boy who'd become lost and his brother's search for him. In fact, it wasn't creative enough to just get kind of a clap at the end. It wasn't creative enough just to amuse or distract. It was creative enough to make everybody in that room weep. And for that moment, I am eternally grateful. That moment taught me that no matter what I did or who I was as a teacher, within each of my students, there was a creative capacity that would not be stilled by my expectations, by an examination process, by anything else. And I think it also taught me about a whole lot of debilitating myths that we have about creativity, and Ruth has touched on a couple of them. That we are creative because we are special. You know, there's the creatives and there's the rest of us. You know, the advertising industry is full of creatives, and then there's people who do other stuff. But why is that? Why do we think that? I mean, my take on all this is that actually that's a terrible thing to be doing to ourselves. That we should always kind of recognise that there are creativities in all sorts of things that we do. The way that we talk to our kids, the way we understand relationships, the way we craft a fantastic cake or a neurone or whatever it might be. These are creative acts. Anna Kraft says there are two sorts of creativities. There's the Mozart, Shakespeare, Justin Bieber, kind of creativity. That's a big C creativity. And there are the little c creativities that we do every moment of the day. Every time that we engage with one another, there are creative aspects in what we do. And I think the moment that we start to engage with that a little bit more kind of, a little bit more centrally, things will change. So if that's true, if I believe that these capacities are within us all, what does that mean for the way we school? What does that mean for the way we do universities? What does that mean for the way we treat our young people? Of course, we encourage them, don't we, to be incredibly creative in schools. We encourage them to play and work with our creativity in embodied ways, don't we? Don't we? No, we don't. And if we think about what Ken Robinson said about universities and schools, he said that if you looked at schools and universities, you would think that students' bodies were transport systems for their brains. That the body actually had no connection to learning. But what we know is actually the body is incredibly important for learning. And yet schools and schooling and universities and the things that we do day in, day out make it feel like they're not important. That creativity, embodiment actually aren't important. The University of Sydney Faculty of Education has just undertaken quite a large study into the arts, motivation, engagement and academic achievement. Part of the reason Andrew Martin, Robin Gibson and myself did that study was to find out whether people who were involved in creative things at school, like dance, drama, music, visual arts, film, actually succeeded across schooling and actually outside schooling. We wanted to know whether it was possible that these things actually had effects across the board. And so we looked at that. Andrew Martin is a statistician. I'm not a statistician's bootlace, but Andrew threw statistical napalm at this study. He threw everything he could to try and knock this over. Because we knew there would be people coming out of this saying, well, you know, it didn't do this and it didn't do that. But he rigorously engaged with this. And what we found in this longitudinal 3-year study, internationally triangulated, it has all the rigorous bells and whistles, is that kids who do the arts are actually far more engaged at school. They do better academically, they do better socially. And the question that I ask myself is that because of the creative moments that they get the chance at every day in every way in their schooling? And what might be possible if we allowed that to infiltrate what we do throughout schooling and throughout our lives in wherever our lives may be taking us, whether we're engineers or accountants or microscopy, whatever you are. Whatever moment or whatever place we find ourselves, what would be the opportunity? And I came up with this idea, and it's probably not my idea, I've probably stolen it, which is the heart of creativity, theft, of this idea of guerrilla creativity. That it's possible that actually the systems that we're working with will not evolve quickly enough for us to make creativity central to everything we do. And so I suppose my challenge to everybody tonight, and many of you I'm sure are already taking up this challenge, is to go into your workplaces, to go into your schools, to go into your places of work and leisure and be creative in whatever way you can. To use the things that you have at your disposal to change the culture of those places from within. To change those places to make them more creative. If you're a teacher, to change what you do. If you're not using creativity, to make creativity available to your students. To find ways to revolutionise and evolutionise what's possible. I suppose for me, it comes down to Ryan in that drama room almost 20 years ago. If I'd been smart enough, if I'd been awake enough, if I'd known enough to make creativity part of his life, what might have been possible for the Ryans and the other kids in that class? So it's kind of driven from my regrets from those moments, but also my understanding that when creativity is made part of what happens in schools and places of learning, amazing things can happen. So I suppose that's my challenge to us all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, and to all our panellists. You've all got such great ideas, and everyone's quite different, but there are lots of similarities as well. Do we have any questions from the audience? We thought we might give you an opportunity to handle one of these lovely neurons. So if you'd like to ask a question, I'll throw you this neuron, and then you can pass it on to the next person. Whoops! Can you pass that to Brooke? Hi, Brooke. But I just thought I'd start off by asking each of our panellists, as academics, what do you do whenever you're faced with a situation where you feel that the university environment is stifling your own creativity? How do you deal with that? Is that something each of you would tackle? You've all got microphones beside you, by the way.
I'd like to hear the lady in blue. She looks like she's actually got an answer to that.
Well, my immediate thought was just I would go off-site. So I don't need the university condone my creativity for me. So if it just means doing it elsewhere, I would do that. But in some ways, a lot of the research happens that way anyway. You do it, and then you kind of bring it into the sort of regulated framework of how you need to publish it and things like that. So a lot of stuff goes on underneath the radar, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Anyone else?
Well, I'd also add too that sometimes in the teaching context, sometimes it's our own fear that constrains us. I think when I was younger and used to do teaching around the body, I did way more experimental things because I hadn't learned not to, in a sense, and I was very enthused. And then I think the further on I've gone, the more timid I've become and the more conventional. And every now and then when I've gone out to do kind of body style exercises with my students, and all these caveats in the new sort of quasi-legal situation about they've got to be opt-out clauses, and I've brought other work in case people really going to be discomforted by this, and all this kind of warning them the week before, and if anyone's upset by, the most sort of elementary things of getting up and doing stuff with your body. And some of that is real, some of it is about a new legal environment and a diversity of students and their experiences and having to recognise that. And some of that is having let that make me become afraid, because finally one time when I was doing something, the students are like, oh, just get on with it, just do it, come on, let's all do this, So some of it is the way we internalise various external things too.
Comment, Lee?
Well, this is upon a thread of my own. last year, one of my flatmates applied for a job at another university aside from this, and she didn't get it. And I mean, university jobs are sometimes really hard to get. I've tried many occasions and got a couple, of course. But she didn't get it. And around the breakfast table, forgetting I was there, she expressed her annoyance while saying, "I didn't want such a dry and sexless life anyway as an academic." My eyes just narrowed. So my answer to that would be revenge. Revenge. Show that person that you're creative. Don't expect them to notice, but I mean, in the process, you will be creative.
Okay.
Actually, I just want to add, because I personally find working as an academic incredibly liberating. So, I mean, you don't really have a boss or a master. You know, you really are author of your own destiny. I mean, you have to teach and do things and go to meetings, but otherwise you can really set your own path. So it's an incredibly liberating place to work in. So there are very few restrictions, actually.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think the other thing about that is when I feel myself limiting my creative options for my students, collaboration is often the way to go. So collaborating with artists, collaborating with, you know, really skilled administrators, collaborating with people who you know will spark and you can engage with. I think one of the other debilitating myths is creativity is singular, but it's often collaborative, it's often social, it's often in relationship that creativity starts to bloom. And I think to the extent that I've been creative in any part of my life, it's always been due to the people that I've worked with. So I think collaborate first. That's a way of really kind of liberating creative ideas.
Yeah, good answers. Thank you. Brooke.
Oh, there are too many questions to ask, but it was actually just about your use of colour in the microscopy. If that's how you say it.
Magic image making.
Right, okay. So, I mean, it's not microscopy, I don't think, the Hadron Collider, but it was on that I'd always wondered about the use of colour in science, and you're suggesting it's all arbitrary, is that right? And that this is where you can be a bit creative. Are there any rules that bind you with the use of colour?
Well, my co-supervisor of my thesis had a rule. He was an AFL fan, and he was a very smart individual, but he was from Adelaide, and his team was the Adelaide Crows. Now, my direct boss and the person who employed him was also from Adelaide, and he was a fan of Port Power. And of course, they've got different colours. And my co-supervisor's rules is that his colour scheme was blue, yellow, and red, brightly shining out at our mutual boss's eyes, you know, and he never realised it. It was a creative use, I guess.
It's arbitrary.
Subconscious.
It's not arbitrary. It's go for Crows or whatever their name was.
Whoever you barrack for, that's the answer. Any more questions? Would anyone like to touch one of these lovely neurons? A microphone up here.
To Michael, in my vintage, you did Maths 1 and 2, Physics and Chemistry, English and French. Music at my school, which was a boys' school, was there, but blokes who did it were sissies. Do you think the situation has now changed, or are you trying to change that?
Yeah, I think the situation has changed radically. So students that you went to school with and yourself wouldn't have been able to do drama or dance or music or visual arts or film, I don't imagine. And that's an opportunity now for young people in schools. But I suppose what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be amazing if physics was taught with the kind of approaches that we've seen here tonight? You know, wouldn't it be amazing if maths was taught in an embodied way as well? Not all the time, not for everything, but what would happen if creativity was at the centre of those teaching opportunities? So I suppose yes, but more's required is my thinking on that. And also, if you look at what's going on in the UK, the government in the UK has just removed drama and dance from the curriculum altogether. And so it's always important to be kind of a sentinel at the gate to this kind of idea that these things are the garnish rather than the meal. So yeah, I would say that there's more to do.
If anyone else would like to ask a question, the microphone here. And the neuron. You can have mine.
Immersed as we are in postmodern thinkers like Jean Baudrillard these days in artistic milieu, I guess one could be forgiven for thinking that creativity happens in the desert of postmodern reality, creatio ex nihilo. That is to say that we're creating out of some kind of a almost superficial existential nothingness, albeit highly mediatised, hyper-mediatised. Do you think that socio-technological developments have some kind of a symbiotic interplay with our creative manifestations, whether it be as students in the education system or whether it be academics who are working in a culture of increasingly digitised interdisciplinarity?
Who'd like to tackle that one? Liane? That sounds like one for you.
I'm still digesting it. I'm sort of ex nihilo somewhere. Okay. I mean, interestingly for me, because, yeah, we teach, in the design lab, we teach various kinds of, interactive technologies and digital. We look at the digital layer that can be woven through contemporary society and the environment. But equally, we're looking at, the human experience of these sorts of things as well, and trying to be a bit more critical about the kinds of things we are creating. So I think my work too is trying to just make sure we have that sensibility in there, that we're not just very technology driven. And I mean, we can be incredibly creative. There's so much, I know with things like Photoshop and all kinds of movie makers, we can do, everyday people now can make all these amazing creative things. But also they're sort of binding us to the computer more and more tightly, so that, as you were mentioning in terms of embodiment and being sort of physically lively in how you make these things as well, I think is important. So I think there needs to be a pushback sort of there, because otherwise we'll all end up with these sort of diseases of sedentary behaviour.
Well, the habit body, of course, is not only about having a boring life, it's about killing yourself, sitting there, putting on weight, getting all creaky. I mean, you've got so much potential there to kind of have us doing interesting things as we work. I love it.
Yeah, I'm working on it, don't you worry. We better
Any
stand
more
up.
questions?
Can I also
Yes.
try and respond to that? I don't think I'll probably get there, but one of the things I think we were talking about fetishising creativity, and I think that may be true, but I think the education system's also fetishised technology in a way that it's seen it as kind of mysterious. We've got mysterious technology and mysterious creativity. My view is that neither of them are particularly mysterious. The technologies that kids are using in schools are like the pen, of 50, 60 years ago. They actually have the potential to enable or otherwise what happens in terms of creative process. My sense is that we have been so fixed on putting kind of laptops, and I've got that vision in my head of Kevin Rudd putting that ancient laptop out, when he was doing the laptops for schools policy, and the horror that each teacher would have to teach to these laptops, which is disembodying in the extreme. And so what happened in that context was the technology was bolted onto schools rather than the other way around. Schools should have been, and teachers should have been running that agenda, and yet we had this fetishisation of technology which was running what we were doing in terms of creative process and schooling. And I think that process is now slowly changing as we're seeing technologies becoming wearable and mobile and kind of we're breaking down that idea that it's one computer per kid per screen. I come back to that idea about collaboration. When we've got a technology that allows kind of persistent, easy collaboration amongst kids in school and people in the workplace, I think that's when we'll start to see the breaking down between that fetishisation of technology and kind of and creativity and actually build something that works to support that creative process rather than kind of disable it.
We have another question here.
Hi, thanks. I enjoyed all your speeches or talks. My question is, where on the spectrum do you think artists sit then in this kind of idea that everyone is creative? What is it, do you think, that artists do, or do you think that the definition or the label of being an artist is something that is becoming resituated? And what role do you think the embodied practices that kind of, I think, most artists would say are pivotal to their practice has in the relationship with creativity and the kind of dialogue that is definitely emerging, on a global basis?
Do you direct your question at anyone in particular?
No.
No. Would anyone like to have a...
I'll just say briefly, I think artists are the leaders of that process. I don't think the term artist need be done away with. I think there is a growth in kind of the accessibility and the opportunities for kind of everyone to be artistic. But I think artistic practice often leads creativity, and I can't see a reason why that needs to change. In fact, I would see artists coming more to the centre, into our classrooms more, into our workplaces more, into our labs more. So I would see that as artists being a really central, and designers being a really central part of that.
Did you have something to add, Ruth?
Well, it's almost a question back to Michael too. When you were speaking, Michael, I was really intrigued by the relationship between the sort of capital C creative, or in this case then capital A artists, and everyday creativities. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of Virginia Woolf's little novel, Mrs. Dalloway, and writing in a time where only the men could be the capital W writers or the capital A artists and so on. Mrs. Dalloway was a sort of riposte, a feminist riposte, to say, having a dinner party, as you said with the example of the cake, having a dinner party can be a creative thing. You're creating something, you're bringing together things, you're adding something of yourself, and you're creating, again, in its own way, a much more transient thing than a material art form, but that it was an art itself. So as you were speaking, I was wondering whether you thought those different creativities were similar, were on a continuum. Are they different in degree or kind? And I suppose that's, again, the question that I had in response to your question is it, do you yourself see, for example, an artist as being just at the far end of a continuum that we all share, or do you think there is something distinctive about what artists have and do?
I am an artist, but I'm many things, and I have questioned myself about what is creativity for a really long time. And I think it's both. I think that there are, having sort of spent time, particularly during my thesis years, in really engage with artists, that I think that there are distinct things that are almost intangible because they don't really belong to the world of words that artists do. And they're very materially and physically based, and they're sort of, I think that, if we had to use sort of conventional neurobiology, we'd sort of say they're very on the right hemisphere side of things. And I don't know if that's a gross generalisation, but then again, I think there's a really big spectrum. I think there's a lot of crossover, and I really think actually there's a lot of missed opportunities for dialogue between artists and people who are creative. And I think artists often feel that that dialogue isn't happening, and then they sort of end up further out on the continuum. And then, you know, I know artists who would love to come into your labs and, you know, have or movement or any of those things, you know, and everyone's different in how they work. So I think that there's a lot more potential for collaboration, but I also think that artists still do something and look at things in a different way, and you feel like they're bounded by a different sort of realm of descriptors, if you like. Their language is slightly different.
We often do have artists come into our labs and use the instruments either unaided or with supervision. And they've produced artwork, some of which, you know, are similar to the images I showed tonight. But in answer to your question, I would say that, say, creativity in science, or like art and science, still must be scientific. It has that scientific meaning. And yeah, something that I've become a little bit more developed and less, I guess, I don't know, uncultured or barbaric or what have you, about in my, not August years, but as I've aged, as my beards grow longer, is that an appreciation of art. Because when I was younger, I was like, oh, I could have done that. Anyone could have done that. And then someone will explain to me the meaning behind it and what it means and the threads running through it. And I'm going, I would not have seen that, but now I see that. Wow. Okay. And every time I see new art now, it's like, well, it might be obvious to some of you, but I don't just dismiss it out of hand because of, you know, the techniques gone into it. They're going, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to say? What are they trying to affect? So I think some art has a purpose, and all science has a purpose. And, you know, creativity must, in different fields, again, must bow to, you know, what the purpose is that the, you know, the maker is doing.
We've got a question up the back.
Yes, this is a question actually for the microscopist. I think it's Lee. Wonderful talks,
Hello,
everybody.
flatmate. Thanks for coming.
You mentioned the purpose of science. All science has a purpose. From your unique perspective, what would you see as the purpose of science?
Just a quick answer. We've got 2 more questions over here.
Then a quick answer for you.
The purpose of science.
Personally, it's because I'm still a big kid. I mean, that thing I made, it would be a valid criticism to say it's a toy, and it is. But it's a toy that, to me, has meaning, and I hope might have meaning to other people.
Thanks, Lee. A question here and then one down the front.
Just wondering about the role of pleasure in creativity. I mean, I don't know if I'm being creative. It often takes someone to sort of say, oh, you're being creative. You know, it sort of responds to what you said. Oh, I don't call myself creative. I don't see myself creative. But so I just wanted to sort of emphasize that the role of, if you like, the other in recognizing someone's creativity is really essential. And particularly, you know, because we identify the artists as the creative ones in our society and not the scholars and not the scientists. But also, yes, the pleasure, because I believe that when I'm experiencing pleasure, I think I'm probably being creative. That the pleasure has something to do with creativity. And I'm sure that all of you experience great pleasure in your work. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. Or some pleasure in your work. And I was wondering if you think about that connection between pleasure and creativity.
Yes, certainly. And I think there's an interplay between pleasure and also its opposites, and also boredom and all of those things. I think anyone who works creatively in any kind of medium, whether it's writing or music or painting or sculpture or scholarly work, there's a lot of discipline, there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of trial and error, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of, oh no, I'm hopeless, how could anyone possibly think this is any good? There's all of that. And then there's moments of like, yeah, nailed it. And I think I can't imagine any worthwhile endeavour that doesn't, over a long period of time, that doesn't have all of those elements. And I think, again, historically, you know, to fetishise one of them, so to go down the romantic line and say, you know, that creativity comes from suffering and pain, well, it can do, but it can also come from joy and levity and flippancy, or a range of things. So I think for me, I'd be recognising that creative endeavours draw right across the whole emotional spectrum.
Can I also pick up on the idea that other people recognise your creativity? I think that's really true. That relationship's really important, that other people appreciate creativity when they see it and name it. But I think the other thing is that people often say they're not creative because they presume that if they try something once and they don't get it right, they can't do something. And yet creativity is full of rigour. It is full of discipline. Ask any musician how easy it is for them to be creative. Ask any artist. And most of them will tell you that there's an incredible amount of discipline and rigour involved. And I think what we see that most in filmmaking. You can see anyone can get to a worldwide audience by filming a kid biting another kid's finger, you know, and that goes viral. But would we say it's great creativity or great art? Well, maybe it is. But I think that what we see on YouTube is kind of the outpouring of the undisciplined use of technologies, as we've been talking about before. But the discipline and the rigour that comes with true creative work, I think, or kind of deep creative work, probably is a better way to put it, is quite profound. And I think that's something that often gets missed. We think that creativity is kind of this mystical kind of thing, but it's actually often about hard work and pleasure, I think. And I'd agree with Ruth.
Can I just add also that I think there's a great pleasure in the making and the crafting of something, but also I think that, you know, creative risk-taking can be extremely exhilarating. So if you can put yourself in a situation where you're exposing yourself to a new idea, a new way of doing things, or working with a person, or putting yourself on stage, or whatever it is, that you know, there's also pleasure in that, even if you fail.
Because you're getting over fear. You're kind of playing with that fear pleasure.
Yeah, on that edge.
There's a question here.
My question's to Lee. Going to the image of the cancer cell, is that sort of imagery being used in the treatment of disease? Because you know, when you get a diagnosis, they show you an image and they go, there's the sort of, you know, the tumours we're worried about, and it's just a really imprecise sort of blur, and you can't read the images because you don't have that sort of literacy. But what if it were made real to you in a way that you could recognise and then probably deal with imaginatively in a much more real way?
Well, I'm not a biologist, but I did read the caption to that image. Now, that image, and this relates to the colour question as well, that image was made by confocal fluorescence colour. So sometimes the colour is chosen for us. You know, we can change it using Photoshop if we want, but if it's already telling us and other scientists crucial information, i.e. how that particular image was made, then we'll leave it be. Now, I didn't explain, but some of the colours related to the connective tissue around the milk duct cells there. And what is of interest is the motility of those cells and how they move through such flesh. And so, what's the word? Metastasize. And so it's that image and others like it, maybe not so pretty, but more scientifically informative, are telling scientists how these cells move through like a matrix of collagen, of connective tissue. And so that's how it's used.
Can I just add something? I imagine a number of people were at this year's Art Express exhibition with the Year 12 artworks. There was a student there whose descriptor of the work that she had made said she had a form of cancer, and she'd made a work using cancer cells, starting from images she'd acquired somewhere, and then making them up in great big pink glitter and making them glamorous and playing around with them. And she'd described in her description of the work that this was her way of engaging and perhaps controlling, but certainly engaging imaginatively with her own condition.
There's also a lot of biomedical animations that are being developed now using real research data that actually show in animated sequences what happens right down at the molecular level. And a group you could look up is VisB Plus, who've just released a short film called Cancer's Not One Disease. And it's an animation that just shows what happens as a cancer forms, and then it's cut with a woman who's actually got cancer talking about it. And it's quite powerful because it's really explaining to you what's going on, and what you see is based on up to date what's known in the research field. So check out VisB Plus for more.
Yeah, but to maybe use those images to engage creatively with, with in a creative way, where you can basically, think about the way you can combat it.
Yes. The lady,
Whiting.
Oh yeah, the lady next to you can shed some light. Jenny Whiting, who's also a microscopist.
I am. I was involved in putting that exhibition together, and I've worked for quite a long time with biomedical images and connecting with the public over those. And one particular fact that the comments that come back, particularly over cancer images, that seems to really resonate with the public is, how can something so awful look so beautiful? And I think, and people often take those images, those beautiful images, and work with them. I've had people, artists, particularly with cancer, have taken those images and done lovely embroideries and fabric craft, have created paintings, and have actually used those images as a way to have that personal connection with their own cancer, with their own disease often. But to go back to a lot of the images that are created themselves, there's such a wide range of techniques that can be applied to different kinds of diseases, and depending what the researchers or the pathologists are looking at, they will image things in different ways to tell them different kinds of information. So the image that your doctor might show you may not be as easy to relate to as perhaps some of these images that have been coloured in a way specifically to communicate certain aspects of a disease. So I think that's what people who use images as a communication tool can really get into that colour and use it in a way that can really extract particular features that can communicate that best.
Any more questions? There's one up the back there. I just wanted to ask, comment really to the panel, that it seems that for all of you, subjective thinking and personal experience plays heavily in your own research. How does that fit in the academic environment today, drawing on emotions, personal experience?
Come join us in Gender and Cultural Studies. It's central, obviously. Obviously, the feminist legacy of the personal being political, but and then later postmodern experimentation with different forms of writing and different genres of writing. So we encourage students to work across a range of modes and genres. They quite frequently write about their own experience and draw on it, but always we don't want it to be the same as a chat down the pub with your mates. So it's always then about how you connect your own experience up to the experiences of others, to a bigger sociocultural picture, and to lineages of thought. So it's always about a movement. Sometimes one starts with one's own experience and moves outward to the bigger picture, and other times start with something from the bigger world or from theoretical concepts, and then think, well, what does that mean for me in my body, in my everyday life? So a movement backwards and forwards and an experimentation with different modes of writing is central to what we do.
Would anyone else like to comment on that, just in terms of peer-reviewed journals, for example, and how open are they to that kind of research presentation?
I think there's been a profound shift over the last 10 years, actually, in what's possible and what's kind of demonstrable in those kind of fora. And so, you know, showing video materials in an online journal is now quite commonplace. And so I think technologies have actually assisted in that opening up and that kind of reflective stuff. But I'd go back to what Ruth's saying as well. I think it's always a backwards and forwards. Following your own passion that doesn't do anything to enrich the community around you is almost pointless in my view as an academic. And there may be a point to doing that in other areas, but I always think about how does my own work impact on the lives of others for the better, rather than just, you know, am I just driven by my own kind of my own ideas, I suppose. So I would see it very much as a two-way street.
I usually publish in the area of human-computer interaction, which is an interdisciplinary discipline which has background in computer science as well as psychology and social sciences. So it's a bit of a fusion of everything, but it's been historically quite much more scientific based, and you know, the first person voice has not really been very present. But I think in the last few years there's been a bit of a shift happening as it's been opening up to sort of artistic and design realms and critical theory and things like that, where that kind of voice is much more normal and expected. So it's interesting to seeing that shift. And then don't know how my own writing is going to change, but previously I had to sort of be kept quite at bay. But also the work I'm doing where I'm looking at how you can, even in design, that you can have those voices active. So you have the first person, the experiential voice, you have looking from the machine side, so what does a computer or some sort of system see of a phenomenon, and then also other people, like, you know, external observers. So trying to make those kind of connections across. But yeah, there are certainly shifts happening in that particular domain as well.
Lee?
In the field of material science in which I publish, it's still pretty dry and mathematical, and I guess the reaction to that, besides quitting and going to Indonesia for a year and teaching science informally and to kids, is that with visualizations, you know, we do want to make it interactive. One of my current projects, I'm told I can't talk about it, but it's you wear these magical glasses and they give you a 3D representation of something, a world. It rhymes with virtual virality. And if you get my innocuous drift there. So, yeah, basically, we're just trying to get this project up to like push the boundaries of how we see data. And, well, yeah, lately in learning how to use this technology, I haven't been doing much microscopist. I've been a very bad scientist. I've been making worlds. But again, that's a bit of a sandbox exploration.
Okay. There's one question up the back.
Hi.
Hi.
My sort of question is around evaluation and measurement. I work for a not-for-profit arts organisation called Deluxe Media Arts, and we develop programs for young people across science and art. You know, so when you were talking about creativity being at the sort of forefront of learning, that's sort of what we do. But when you have to talk about measurements and criteria and evaluation so that you can kind of continually develop these programs with a, you know, funding cycle of a year, 3 years, how can you create that sustainability? And, you know, we're not necessarily researchers, but we are artists. So how do we then contribute so that we can continue kind of working in the community and so that the work we do actually creates effect?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think we've got several audiences for our work, and often the audiences want numbers, and often the audiences want effect sizes, but sometimes the audiences will listen to stories as well. And so I think we need to think about research that fits the work that you're doing with communities and schools, but also talks to those audiences that need to know about numbers and hard data, inverted commas, in the same way that our study did that. We knew that if we just did another qualitative study around how good the arts are for kids, no one would listen. And so we kind of, I suppose, danced with the devil in a way. You know, we engaged scientists, we engaged people who were going to do quantitative statistics, and what we had in that partnership, I think, became quite strong because it allowed us to bring the scientists to the table and talk to the scientists about the way the arts work and actually understand each other. And so I suppose getting to the final part of your question was, what can you do? I think find researchers who get what you do, can engage with what you need to evaluate and build something around that won't only suit the art and the kind of community work you're doing, but will also speak to multiple audiences. And there are plenty of researchers out there who I know of in the academy and outside the academy that can help you do that kind of thing. So I would find research partnerships that you can have over a long term.
Does anyone else have anything to add? Research and evaluation, favourite topic. Well, listen, Alexia, I should talk to you afterwards. We've got some things that we can send you from an Inspiring Australia perspective, but I don't know whether they'd meet your more expansive evaluation understandings here. But I'd like to thank the panellists. It's been a really interesting discussion. If you could join me in thanking the four of them.